Well, UFC 272 is literally tomorrow night, and there are some fun fights on it. This isn't an earth-shattering card, honestly. No title fights, no real groundbreaking events happening here. There's some good talent coming up the ranks that we can see what happens with them, and we can see a lot of people making moves or people fighting for their spot in certain positioning areas. Mazvidal Covington is a fun fight to have at the main card. It's just a little weird that we're not having a title fight when every other card I've covered so far has been a title fight. But getting into it, we're starting off the early prelims with the 16-5-1 Dustin the Haniak Jacoby, looking to keep his winning streak against 16-4-0-1 Mikhail the Hussar Oleksiejczuk. That's wrong. With Jacoby being 3 inches taller, taking 2 inches in reach, and about 6 years older. Jacoby is heavy into the striking, with a solid differential of 5.20 landed, 3.63 absorbed. With that, he has some decent power, 10 KO wins on record, 2 of those coming in the UFC, but that does not seem to be a major decider in his UFC stint so far. His big weakness, looking at his game, is the takedown defense. It's a whopping 58%. It's not the worst we've seen, but it's certainly not great when someone takes you down 9 times in one fight. However, Oleksiejczuk is shockingly similar to Jacoby with a 4.80 landed, a 3.74 absorbed, and having 11 TKO KO wins in his career. However, in the UFC, he has been able to show up more so with his power a bit, with 3 of his 4 UFC wins coming by KO TKO. He technically has a higher takedown percentage with a 0.64 to a 0.30, but I don't think that matters too much in this fight, considering he hasn't thrown one since 2017. But looking at Vegas odds, the favorite here is Oleksiejczuk, and I'm going to be boring and agree. I see why he's the favorite, and in this battle of strikers, he seems to have the edge with his power and the current hot hand in this moment. Now, obviously, if they stand and bang on the feet, this is going to be this fight will be very different and very close, because power can come and go at random times. If Jacoby finds his power on the feet, I could see this going his way, but as of right now, I'm looking at Oleksiejczuk. He's had the power more recently. He's had the hotter hand. I'm going to pick him. And before we move on to this next one, there's a little confusion here. The official UFC website at the time of writing lists the opponent as Eric Gonzalez, but UFC stats and Sure Fucking Dog have it as Ludovit Klein. So I'm going to go with Ludovit Klein here instead of Eric Gonzalez. It might be wrong, but I don't want to do a double stat block when I'm already behind on this. 11-3, Devontae King Cage with a K Smith looks to rebound against the 17-4 Ludovit Mr. Highlight Klein, with Devontae being 2 inches taller and taking 4 inches in reach. Smith is a heavy striker again, a 5.10 landed, 3.86 absorbed. And with that being said, he's very much a kill or be killed sort of fighter. He has no wins or losses by decision. He constantly presses the action every round, some finishes coming in that third round, so we know his gas tank is at least good enough to get there. His takedown game exists, it's barely used, he's had 1 throw in his UFC career so far, but his takedown defense is pretty high at 80%, and he does have 1 submission win, so it seems like he can play in different positions. Klein is a very different story style-wise. He has a 3.35 landed to a 4.58 absorbed, but he has that shockingly much higher takedown average of 2.10. With an accuracy of 44%. His takedown defense is pretty low, so it seems he's willing to play from the back, and though it can be turned against him with 2 submission losses on his record. However, he also is very much a finisher, with only 1 decision and one decision win, 1 decision loss. But with that higher takedown percentage, he also has 8 submission wins. Now, I don't have my Vegas odds cheat sheet for this, so I'm going to take a gamble with this and pick Smith. I like Smith's excellent striking, and when looking at that 44% accuracy, I get a little nervous. And normally, I'd pick the grappler here. But that 5.10 landed to 3.86 absorbed, that's pretty good when facing somebody who only has a 44% accuracy on those takedowns. If he's able to keep it on the feet, I think that's his game, that's his realm. And if he can keep Mr. Highlight off of him, I think King Cage can win this. Also, I dislike both these nicknames. They're both really stupid. This next one would have been Jessica Evil Eye versus Man and the Beast Fiorot, but something happened. If I'm remembering correctly, Jessica Eye pulled out. So then they brought in Jennifer Maia. Then I'm pretty sure Jennifer Maia pulled out. So the UFC said, you know what? Nobody fights in this slot. We're just cutting a fight. So moving on to 17-12-1, Tim Elliott, trying to get back in the win column against the 14-1 Tagir Ulanbekov, with Ulanbekov taking 5 years in age and 4 inches in reach. Elliott is this ground-focused fighter, and despite a relatively low 46% accuracy, he is very aggressive and will stack them in fights. He had 12 takedowns against Louis Smolka. It is something that can be turned against him if the person he's facing is able to have a high enough skill level to do that. He has won 6 career fights by submission, but he's also lost 5 the same way. Going to Ulanbekov on the same hand is a ground-heavy fighter. 56% accuracy across his 2 UFC fights, where he's had 4 and 5 takedowns in those fights. Now, similarly, he can submit fighters with 6 career wins by submission and 6 by decision. So a little bit of a grinder in that regard, but he certainly is able to work it for the finish. And this is a short one, but they're 2 very similar fighters. So when it comes across, his Vegas favors Ulanbekov, and this is a difficult one. Because of that, rather. Elliott has the experience here, but he doesn't have the consistency. Ulanbekov has the consistency, but a bit less UFC experience. So in the end here, I'm going to go with Ulanbekov based on his much more consistent style in his fights. And at the end of the early prelims, we have 24-12, Brian Boom Keller, looking for a win over undefeated Umar Nurmagomedov, with Keller being 9 years older, but Nurmagomedov taking 2 inches in height and 3 in reach. Now, Keller is another ground-focused fighter with a 1.87 average across his UFC career, though he's rocking a 42% accuracy on that. Running along with that, he seems to also be pretty good at stacking them in fights or maintaining control once he's gotten that one. He is a bit of a finisher with 10 submissions and 8 TKO KO wins in his career, though recently it's been a more of a grinding decision game. Get to the end, dominate the fight in that regard, and move on. To note, his landed is lower than his absorbed, which isn't always the most important thing in some of these fights, but in this one it matters a little bit. Nurmagomedov is a bird of a slightly different feather. He still has the monstrous takedown game, which is the focus of his style. He does have a singular KO win, but literally everything else is submission or decision, split about 50-50. He seems to be more so based in just dominating and controlling the fight from mounted position compared to Keller. With that said, he is able to strike fairly well. It's not a power striking, it's more or less, hey, it's a threat, so you can't ignore it. And the favorite is, shockingly, Nurmagomedov by a wide margin, and lazily, I'm going to agree. He's had a bit more success with his aggressive style and stacking, and while he hasn't had a whole bunch of UFC fights, I think based on how he's fought outside the UFC, I don't see that being too much of a change coming into the UFC in how he fights and how effective it can be. So the onus is on Keller here to flip it to his hand. I think he can do it. I just think the ball's in Nurmagomedov's court. But starting off the actual prelims, we have the 10-3 Marina Iron Lady Moraz, looking to keep winning against the 10-2 Maria Demon Slayer Agapova, with a 6-year age difference favoring Agapova without much else worth mentioning. Moraz is a weird to look at stat-wise. She's about even landed and absorbed, and can definitely hang in there with opponents who have a high striking output. Then there's her takedown percentage, which is about 0.56 across her UFC career. She does have submission wins, but as of recent they haven't been showing up, which leads me to look at her as more of a grinder who makes it to the decision and wins the fight. Agapova is similar, but the main difference is that she doesn't really make use of takedowns all that much. She plays more, leads me to say she plays more off her back and seems to be pretty dangerous with her submissions, with 5 over her career. So between these two, it's kind of a game of I don't know where this ends up. Now the favorite is Agapova, I get why, but I'm going to differentiate myself here and run with Moraz here. I like her more aggressive style based on the stats, and with similar striking stats, if we stay on the feet, I think it's close. And with that low takedown percentage, someone initiates it. I don't know how effective it is in this regard, considering both don't have that incredibly high percentage. Next up is a battle of names that I will struggle to say, and I apologize. 11-1, Nikolai Negumereanu tries to keep winning against 9-2 Kennedy African Savage Nezchukwu. Kennedy being 2 years older with 5 inches of height and reach. Nikolai, outside the UFC, is very much into the knockout part of the light heavyweight category. In his 3 fights in the UFC, however, he's come across as a grinder. He was outstruck in 2 of the 3 and winning 1 with a single takedown. His latest fight was a KO with a minute 18 left in the first, so maybe he's found his footing, but it's hard to kind of tell at this point. Going over to Kennedy, he's much more of a swing and bang fighter, less landed than absorbed. However, the difference is that more of his power has shown up in the UFC. He has no real takedown game, but is rocking this 80% takedown defense in that regard and has survived takedowns in some of his fights. So there's skill there in either getting back to the feet or surviving long enough to make it to the next round while on the ground. Now, the favorite here is unsurprisingly Kennedy, which, yeah, and I kind of have to agree. He has the more dynamic striking and a more presence in the UFC, in addition to the 5 inches in reach and height, which are helpful. But I think the one thing that makes him different from me is that his power has shown up more at the UFC level. Because a person can have 5 knockouts outside the UFC, but against UFC competition, they might not have any. Kennedy has knocked out UFC competition. So I'm just going to kind of pick him here in this fight. It's just hard for me to read this one. But enough ranting. 15, 1-2. Marina Rodriguez tries to keep her win streak alive against the 13-2 Yan Fury Zhaonan, with Rodriguez being 2 years older, 2 inches taller, and 2 inches in reach. Now, Rodriguez is coming off a 3-fight win streak where she has outstruck her opponents and scored 1 KO. Definitely the hot hand right now. She is definitely much more of a striker with a 5.05 landed, 3.0 absorbed, which is a wicked differential. Further along, she has a 67% takedown defense, which lets her keep it on the feet, where she definitely is more confident and comfortable. She does have a .22 takedown average, but that isn't really part of her game from what I've gathered. Zhao Yan is similar, though she is coming off a loss after a 6-fight win streak, though. Primarily a striker, 5.95 to a 3.61, though she has had no KO wins in the UFC. Has a little bit more of a takedown presence with a .92, but that leads to me to believe it's more of a situational or a game plan thing than so much of a natural part of her game. Now, this is a very kind of close fight in my mind, and the favorite here seems to be Rodriguez, and I'm going to tentatively agree with that. She's the hot hand and has shown more of the power than Zhaonan has, but Zhaonan is no slouch when it comes to striking. 5.95 to 3.61. It's a similar differential, but a higher output than Rodriguez. Could be dangerous, but Rodriguez's power here might change it. Well, the last fight of the prelims is the 11-5 Jalen the Tarantula Turner, winning best nickname of the night, taking on 14-4 Jamie Malarkey, with Turner taking 3 inches in height and reach. Turner is a striking heavy fire with a 6.20 landed to a 4.12 absorbed, which is a great differential. He also isn't lacking in power with 8 KO wins in his career. And the most interesting thing about his game is the .98 takedown average in the UFC. And that's in addition to 2 submission wins in his last 2 UFC fights. His game does look to be a bit deep, though he tries to keep it on the feet. So it reads to me like a reliable tool, but not his main go-to. Malarkey is a bit on the opposite side here. 3.50 takedown average with 5-3 in his 2 UFC losses and 1 in his 2 wins. Seems to be much more of something he goes to when he isn't winning the striking and when he's trying to recover in a fight. He has a 3.03 to a 4.45 average in regards to his striking. He certainly does have pretty good KO power with 2 of his wins coming by KO. But with a 3.50 average, I think that's the highlight of looking at his stats here. Now, the Vegas favorite is Turner, and I definitely agree. The differential in his striking, in addition to his ability to have that KO power, gives him a slight edge here. And I have it written down in my notes as a threatening takedown ability, which is a bit of an exaggeration, but the ability to throw a takedown here gives him a slight edge. Because while Malarkey can shoot, if he can defend it and stay on the feet, he's fine. And it seems like he can handle himself well in the game, and with 2 submission wins, he certainly can be threatening in that regard, which might make Malarkey think twice about engaging in that way. Honestly, this can go either way, so this is a fun fight. But on to the main card, we start with the heavyweights. 7-4, 0-1, Greg Principal Hardy tries to get back into the wins with against 13-3 Sergey the Polar Bear Spivak. Spivak being 6 years younger, Hardy taking 2 inches in height and reach. Hardy is Hardy. 4.84 landed, 3.22 absorbed. Most of his wins come by KO. He's very much the classical kind of heavyweight relying on power. He is coming off 2 straight losses to Marcin Tybura and the Living Shuey, both by KO TKO. And he's definitely still athletic and possesses the power. He does have a weakness when it comes to takedowns against grapplers with how Tybura beat him, and high-level strikers have overwhelmed him. See Volkov. In the fight against Tuivasa just got the shot he needed. Tuivasa can knock people out. We've seen him do it against Derek Lewis now. He got hit hard enough to knock him out. So he's not exactly a super technical in that regard. He is a swing and bang fighter. Now, Spivak is also coming off a loss by KO, but it was Tom Aspinall. And along that line, Spivak has had the classical dead even absorbed and landed, but unlike other heavyweights, he averages a 2.72 takedown average and a 70% takedown defense. Also does have submission ability in addition to some heavyweight power. So he's very much a threat in that takedown regard, which makes this an interesting matchup. And he is the favorite here, and tentatively I'm agreeing. KO power is very dangerous, and Hardy is still athletic. The question is, where does the fight end up for me? On the feet, I would pick Hardy, but this is MMA, so I can see it going to the ground all the same. I could have seen this going like the Tybura fight, where like the second round suddenly turns into Sergey picking him up, slamming him down, and that's the fight, y'all. Or it could be the first round of Tuivasa Hardy, but reverse, where Hardy gets the shot he needs and puts him away. 21-7-0 and 1. Kevin Trailblazer Holland tries to end his losing streak against the 22-11-1-2, Jesus, Alex Cowboy Oliveira. Holland being 5 years younger with 4 inches in height and 5 inches in reach. Holland is a pretty striking heavy fighter with a 3.67 to a 2.34 absorbed. In that regard, setting him up pretty well. He does have pretty good power across his career with 12 KOs. His takedown defense isn't great, as Vettori put up 11 takedowns on him in that fight. And Holland only has a 50% takedown defense. Doesn't really have a real takedown game, a .90 average across his UFC career. They get used very sparingly. On the other hand, Oliveira is the complete opposite. 2.27 takedown average across his UFC career, where all his landed and absorbed are about dead even. On that note, his striking has a weakness, but he has put up 12 KO TKOs in his career, but as of recent, he has been able to put out that power as much. On this note, he's been more of a grinder in his recent fights, hanging in on the feet and controlling ground to get the decision win. And the favorite here is Holland, and I'm going to agree with this weird caveat of basing this on age and athleticism. Holland really relies on his power and ability to land the strikes he needs, and while I think Oliveira is more skilled on the ground, I think Holland's just 5 years younger and very athletic, in comparative to Oliveira, who's a bit older now. He's dangerous, but he just hasn't been as effective as ending the fight as he was originally. Edson Barboza looks to get back on track against 14-1, 14-0 Bryce Thug Nasty Mitchell. UFC listed him as 14-0, and then Sherdog listed him as 14-1, so I wrote down both. Mitchell is 9 years younger. Barboza takes 5 inches in reach. Now, I feel like we all know who Barboza is, but for the sake of repetition, he's a very good striker, and that sums it up well. 4.11 landed with 4.19 absorbed is about par for the course, but doesn't quite do it justice with how technical he is, so everything is dangerous. The power is still kind of there with a KO win over Burgos in 2021 and a career total of 13 KO wins. But as I've said twice now, the technical aspect of it is the most dangerous part. The sheer variety of strikes he can throw, the kicks, the punches, the elbows, the clinch work. It's a lot of stuff he can do that is all dangerous, and you have to keep an eye out because he can rack up points and stun you bad. Doing a complete 180, we end up on Bryce Mitchell, who's very much a ground-heavy fighter with a 3.26 takedown average and a career total of 9 submission wins. Like Barboza, he has a variety of techniques and submissions he can throw on the ground, and his striking is pretty low, but it has decent differential here, 2.29 to 1.46. It's not awful. We've seen worse for ground-heavy fighters, but the ground is where he wants to be, and I think that's where he prefers this fight to go. The favorite here is Mitchell with a small lead over Barboza, and I have to agree. Barboza is not great on the ground, and while he has survived on the ground, That's Mitchell's playground here. And I think the fight ends up there, and I think Mitchell takes this and runs with it. So now, 30-13, Rafael Dos Anjos takes on 16-4-1 Renato Moicano. The 5-year age gap favoring Moicano, along with 3 inches of height and 2 inches of reach. Dos Anjos is, I guess, pretty well-rounded fighter, who I feel qualifies as one of the fighters who does what it takes to win that fight. You have a sort of rounded game where he has about an even landed to absorbed, but he's able to back it up with a good takedown game when needed, averaging 1.93 across his UFC fights. I say rounded style of fighting because he's able to hang in various positions. If it's a ground-heavy fight, he can survive. If it's a striking-heavy fight, he can survive. He can change what his game plan is. And Moicano is similar. He has a better striking differential, 5.12 to 3.58, in addition to a 2.14 takedown average. He's a bit heavier on submissions and takedowns, making use of his skills on the ground with a lot of wins coming from there. But he's able to hang in there with the striking despite his preference to go to the ground. Now, the favorite here is Dos Anjos, and I'm going to agree. Moicano is definitely a threat, could definitely win this fight, but the adaptability of Dos Anjos and the full camp he was in before ending up in this fight, I feel like gives him the edge. Because this was supposed to be against Fiziev originally, and Fiziev, I believe, got COVID or something and had to cancel, so this ended up being switched to Moicano for this one. But final fight of the night, the main event, and it's weird it's not a title fight. 16-3, Colby Chaos Covington looks to cement his spot against the 35-15 Jorge Gamebred Masvidal. Colby is 3 years younger, but Mazvidal takes 2 inches in reach. Covington is a rounded fighter. He has a very good differential with a 4.14 to 3.09 landed and absorbed, and some very good toughness and ability to stand and bang with fights. Look at his 2 fights with Usman. They were both very good fights by him. He didn't win either of them, but he fought well. Additionally, he is also very good at swarming his opponents with strikes, building up a massive amount over some fighters. But despite that, he's not really a knockout kind of guy, only 4 in his career. His takedowns are also very good, 4.10 average across his fights, and the ability to stack these like no one's business. 10 on Robbie Lawler and 7 on Dos Anjos. Going to Masvidal, he's a striking heavy fighter, 4.22 to 3.01 landed and absorbed, with an additional bonus of very good knockout power at 16 KO wins. However, his takedown percentage is only 1.54, which he leans me to say he likes to keep it on the feet, but is not against using them to pound his opponent in the corner. And the favorite here is Covington. I agree. Masvidal is exciting, has the power, has this X factor, but Covington's been the more rounded fighter, has been tested hard, and I think he's looked better in his fights against Usman than Masvidal did against Usman. I think if he can switch it up where the game is taking place, I think that gives him an edge over Mazvidal here. Well, that was UFC 272. Tell me what you thought of what I said. Tell me if I'm wrong. Tell me if you think I'm right. Come make fun of me how this is completely wrong after the fight.